Greetings, you gloriously miserable accursed. It's Herle, maybe with some rum and coke cognition delay after a fantastic Canada Day weekend. Reid is here, Leichnitz is here, Teneycke is here. What did y'all get up for Canada Day? Jordan, were you out there camping?
No, I was at the cottage with the family. So there was family time. There was my parents' dog. There were kids in the lake, boat rides. It was like the whole 9 yards. We had a great time.
Lake's warm enough now?
Well, if you're 6 years old, anything is warm enough. With enough enthusiasm. Not for me, but they had a good time.
Kory, you look like you got some sun.
Yeah. I was out in the blessed province of Saskatchewan for a family reunion, and then jetted back to Ontario and went up to Muskoka for some family time with Nicole's family. It was really nice. Some fireworks and all the good stuff.
Beauty. And Reid?
I also went to the family cottage, and that was fun. Took the younger boys, got to play with other cousins, hang out. Weather was shitty. And the goddamn Lake Association canceled the boat show and the fireworks this year. And then after a vicious and pronounced pushback from Lake Association members who pay dues almost, as far as I can tell, solely for the boat show and the fireworks each year, the association sent a subsequent email saying that it would be rescheduled for the long weekend in August. But I'm still sore about it. And then I came back and we actually skipped Canada Day at the cottage, came back and watched the Jays game, which was fun, but kind of a boring game.
No, nobody is describing Jays games as fun these days. Like literally nobody.
Sam, my 11-year-old, is almost just like throbbing with excitement the entire time he's at the Rogers Center. He's just bouncing around from one thing to another. He got a slushie that was the size of New Brunswick. Like, he's very, very, very happy.
But that's the right energy. Like, it's an act of faith. So, that's
exactly.
Well, I'm getting a box for a few games, and we'll be inviting you guys to have a wonderful sampling of the different hot dogs offered at the venue, and a sampling of the different kinds of beer.
That's my speed.
I hope you will all join. Game be damned. It doesn't matter. The teams playing are secondary. It's all about the hot dogs and beer for me.
Yeah, make sure that box is hopping there, Kory.
Yes.
Yeah. I had a great time this weekend.
Yeah.
Rick Mahoney's daughter, Tara, got married. Some guy named Taylor. And it was was fantastic. It was great.
I saw some photos. It looked lovely.
Yes, it did. It was a great location up in Caledon.
How do you dress for an event like that, David? Do you go full formal? Do you go like...
He puts on the tuxedo t-shirt,
Yeah. Like, how do you... Shorts?
I was in business attire. It was a wedding. I was wearing a suit.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. I wasn't wearing a tie because I only do that for the Rubicon corporate photo. Right? I don't do that under any other circumstance. But otherwise, I was dressed up.
Yeah, this is summer of the white suit for me. I've now bought 3 of them, so we're going to try to do white suit for everything, even semi-formal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Spoken like a man without small children.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Right. White suit. I can't buy no 3 fucking white suits.
We'll be here in our black clothes forever.
If I wore a white suit, there would be no me.
I look like a water buffalo. Well, you would be fat, and I'm fat. That's the problem. We can't wear white.
Not only that, but I'm so pale you couldn't. There'd be no Reid. There would just be like eyes and yellow teeth.
All right. Okay. I guess we have to talk about politics. I don't want to, but we have to. It's the show. People have paid money for us to talk about politics. People have lined up and they're listening.
It's not strictly true.
All right. This week, and not that we're thinking about any 1 or 2 leaders in North America in particular, we're going to discuss how leaders leave their jobs, in what circumstance, when, why, how, what's the best way to go about it. We all have lots of experience with that. Then, relatedly, we'll do a few minutes on the mauling that was the Trump-Biden debate. Our cursed clipping is from the Star. It does make me smile this a little bit. Justin Ling's inside piece on revolt in the Liberal caucus. And then to close the show, the immortal voice of the great Gordon Pinsent will ring in our hey yous. So both Canada and the United States are currently obsessed with how to change leaders. Liberals in Canada are wondering if Trudeau will leave and give them a better chance to survive, and if not, how his hand can be forced. More existentially, people worried about a Trump presidency were rocked by Joe Biden's debate performance last week, which raised doubts not only that he could beat Trump, but whether he should still be president this week. The Democratic nomination process has concluded and the convention is weeks away. Can they pull a switcheroo? So, Scott, I think that listeners are well versed in my theories about why people hang on to leadership positions. So maybe you can lead us off with what you think Biden and Trump are considering and why they don't automatically come to the same conclusions that other people do.
I think you mean Biden and Trudeau.
Biden and Trudeau, sorry. I mean
Because
Biden
I
and
think
Trudeau.
Trump today is considering committing murder with a shotgun and celebrating the fact that he can't even be arrested for it.
Right. I do. Biden and Trudeau.
I mean, obviously, it's an interesting thing because there's a parallel in terms of the dynamic of like, hey, man, if the leaders don't leave, does that mean we're doomed? But how do we get leaders who do not wish to leave to do so? There's a qualitative difference, obviously, between the two situations. No one is thinking that Trudeau needs to leave because they worry that he is going to, incorrectly feed himself oatmeal. But I think one thing that can, and there's, by the way, another distinction, which lots of people have commented on that one. I think the other distinction is that I think people think there's still a fetching chance that Biden can win the election. I'm certainly discouraged and anxious, but it feels like Trudeau's circumstance is less retrievable than the Democrats, than Biden's. And that's an interesting dynamic also, because Biden may be able to try to force this thing back in the bottle like he has over the last 3 days with a little more success, whereas it feels like Trudeau is having more trouble. I just want to say this about Trudeau. I don't know if this is a response to your question, but one of the things that's frustrated me and fascinated me over the course of the past week, since the by-election occurred, which was, let's be honest, a traumatic, explosive event within the Liberal Party of Canada and Canadian politics. It really, 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 truly is. We all talk breathlessly about politics, but this is an event that is a before and after situation. Because before you could say there's problems and polls are bad, but after, there's no diluting the demand for change. There's no diluting yourself if you're a liberal about the size and scale of the challenge that confronts you. And the PMO and the PM have filled that week with nothing. Like they have said, we hear you, we're paying attention, we're listening, and we're working hard. It's time for reflection. But that reflection does not include the possibility of departure. And so
there's so much more to do.
There's so much more to do. And so, and people go, fuck, that's what I'm afraid of. Like if you're not a liberal supporter, if you're not among the 22%, but no, right? And so I think one of the things that's interesting, and I talked to some people around the PM and their reaction in a couple of days afterward was obviously, there's very little you can say immediately afterward, and you got to take stock. And so it's going to take time. And that struck me 24 hours, 48 hours afterward as sensible. The longer it's gone on, the more I'm thinking, you know what? I think I was wrong in that. I think that that's too conventional a perspective. As unpleasant and as daunting as it sounds, I think it's been a big mistake to leave a vacuum. So one contrast, and I'll just leave kind of on this point, one big contrast I would illustrate between the two leaders is that Biden's team, partially because they had already planned a post-debate push because you want it to gain momentum or you need it to counter anxieties, they had cards already set to play. So he gives that spirited teleprompter speech. They get people out. They have Obama with a text to Democrats. Like they galvanized and they filled the vacuum with a message and with a forceful no. And they filled that in. The vacuum for the past week, I think, is only being filled by those who were expressing doubts for Trudeau. And I think that's a dangerous situation for him. I'm not predicting that the revolt is going to get enormous, but when you've got an open letter saying, let's have a national caucus, and people will argue, well, Christie isn't really a true federal liberal and has been a longtime critic. But when people are popping up every day, that's the only thing that's filling the vacuum. And I think, the liberals risk and Trudeau risks signaling that there's no counter strategy. And it's like, guys, people want change. You say you're not going to leave. So that's one big, maybe the only big piece of change that people are genuinely looking for. But you've got to surely come back with some form of change, some answer to that demand for change. And Biden is filling that vacuum. Trudeau has not filled that vacuum. And I think that's to Trudeau's great disadvantage. And it's going to go someplace bad, man. Like, people will fill that vacuum, and it's going to go bad and unpredictably.
You know, Kory, one of the things that I've observed over the course of my life is that people in these positions get a bit, I don't know, messianic, in the sense that they tend to think two things. They tend to think that nobody else could do the job as well as they could do it, right? Like, there's no chance that Pierre Trudeau, when he was resigning in 1984, thought that Turner or Chrétien or Mulroney were going to be better than him at that job. And I don't think that Brian Mulroney thought that Kim Campbell was going to be a better prime minister than he was. They always think they're the right person for the job, and they always think that we're at a hinge point in history that requires them to be there. And just throw that into the hopper when you're thinking about why neither Trudeau nor Biden is agreeing with almost everybody outside who's saying they are now the problem. They're the impediment to what they allege they want.
Well, there's certain jobs or professions or things where it sort of welds itself to your entire self-image. And it becomes such a big part of not only how you view yourself, but how everyone in the entire world interacts with you. Like, I'd say at a professional
level. For example,
level,
I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah, right.
That's my job.
Well, like being a doctor, for instance, like if you're a doctor, I think for some people being an educator, like they're, and they're, gradients of these things, but where a profession or a role becomes, so closely, aligned with how you view yourself and how the world interacts with you on a daily basis, and certainly being Prime Minister of Canada is one of those, types of things, but on, at 100x, level. And so I think it becomes very difficult for people who are in these roles, and, Biden for sure, true of the presidency, but even more true, Harper, like, it doesn't matter who you're talking about, the identity associated with having that role becomes so all-consuming. I think it's very difficult for them to even imagine a future in which that is not part of them anymore. So when do they step aside? When do leaders step aside? Predominantly when they're in opposition. That's predominantly when it happens. It's after they've been defeated. They don't let go willingly. Or it's after, they've lost an election and failed to achieve the post. That's when it normally happens. Very rarely does a sitting prime minister step down. And when they do, it's because of an almost certain defeat, be it internal in the case of, say, Chrétien, or external in the case of, say, Mulroney. And so, the only reason you leave is because you're going to get your clock cleaned. And even then, like, I would argue, it was pretty clear Harper was going down in 2015. And, but it wasn't so absolutely clear that it was beyond any shadow of a doubt. It was just on the balance of probabilities, by far the most likely scenario, but it wasn't an absolute certain scenario. I think for Mulroney, it was an absolute certain scenario. And I think for Chrétien, it was an absolute certain scenario on the internal side that he was going to be gone, or that the party would, tear itself into. And so then you leave. But, absent those conditions, I don't think anybody leaves that post. You leave it in a political pine box, or you leave it because you're certain you're going to end up in a political pine box. And so I think that, if we're talking about, why do people leave and how do they leave and when do they leave? I think those are sort of the rules of nature, so to speak, for people in these positions. I think we're getting there, both in the case of Biden and Trudeau. Certainly as a conservative, I would love to see Trudeau stay. I would say the opposite in the case of Biden, but I would change the rules around that a little bit, but I'll maybe save those comments for when we're on that topic. But like I don't see anything approaching a plausible scenario in which Trudeau retains power. Like, he's going to lose. It's just about how bad, and there's a certain amount of improvement in those probabilities if he's not there. At least there's an additional roll of the dice. But it's not looking good. It's not looking good whether he stays or whether he goes. As a conservative, I'd rather have him stay. I'm sure you guys would rather see him go. But if you're asking me as a pundit, what's the best path for the Liberal Party going forward? It's to have him go now.
A broad question for you, Hurly-Burlyites. How are you all with new technology? Do you dive right in fearlessly? An early adopter, as the ethnographers call it? I have a confession. I'm not that anymore. I'm what's more accurately described as a Herle adopter, which means typically I like new tech and I eventually get around to it when it makes sense for me or when I just stop my goddamn procrastinating. In any case, new technology is the subject of this next series from our presenting sponsor, Telus. Let's call it the Summer of Fascinating and Very Useful Tech. I know, clunky, even as an acronym, TSOFAVUT. In that overlong acronym, we're going to show how Telus is more than just an early adopter, how they're an early innovator, developer, and partner on a number of pretty cool technologies. Not just for the sake of being those things, mind you. Nope. The goal here is better network resilience and improved outcomes for Canadians, labor productivity, and the economy writ large. Stuff like artificial intelligence applied to easing the horrendous traffic conditions in Toronto. Feel me on that one if you live in Toronto. Network slicing to ensure connectivity and resilience at massive commercial events like auto racing and music festivals. A new Telus 5G lab in Quebec that helps young businesses experiment, innovate, and rapidly develop technological proofs of concept. Groundbreaking AI language modeling that's custom tailored to specific enterprise. Quantum computing, open radio access networks, and more. We'll be doing this for the next number of weeks, Hurly-Burlyites. The Summer of Fascinating and Very Useful Tech, TSOFAVUT. Man, I wish I was better at acronyms. So, Jordan, Kory's theory seems to align pretty closely with mine, and if you extrapolate it, it means that Trudeau won't quit for a while yet, months yet, if not more. And it means that Biden won't leave. But some people have left, like when they sensed the country's movement, like Lyndon Johnson arguably could have still won the nomination in 1968, but sensed that the Democratic Party and the country were moving against him. So sometimes people sense that. I mean, let's just take Biden for a second. What do you think's rolling through his head?
Well, I think at this point, Biden and his own thinking on this have likely become so baked in, and he's so insular with his team. I think the amount of outside advice and influence that's actually coming into contact with Biden and his family, I don't know how much there is, I think it's really difficult to imagine a deeper bunker than what that campaign is in right now. And that's actually, I was thinking ahead of the podcast about having been involved in some leaders leaving and not wanting to leave. And what are some of the really danger signs? Like, what are the red flags that you see when that can be coming? And I really think one of the biggest ones is just that it's living in the bunker. It's a shrinking inner circle that is filtering opinion and advice from the outside world to the principal, and really feeding a worldview that is no longer in touch with reality. And I think for Biden and his team, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like everything was just a bad day, or it was there's still an opportunity to turn it around. And like, oh, look, he did great on the prompter speech. Like some of this, I think in their thinking is really, really baked in. And their obvious organizing principle is that the election is going to be a referendum on Trump. And what they can't confront is that the election is now a referendum on the number one thing that they cannot change, which is Biden's age. Like there's nothing they can do to alter that. And that is now what the election turns on. And so I think there's just a disconnect there. And I think that's really shaping what's happening inside that campaign and how those decisions are being made. And look, and I mean, I think there's some parallels in what's happening within the Liberal Party here in Canada. You can see that Trudeau is also at a moment of a very small, a very insular inner circle. He is, for example, not the one principally doing outreach to his caucus in this week after this stunning defeat, which is creating even more of a vacuum internally. That's never been his style, but arguably, if you were going to suddenly find a common touch with caucus, now might be the time.
Can I interrupt you? They have staff calling caucus, PMO staff calling caucus. That strikes me as a really bad idea.
Having been a staff person making those calls and, and not dissimilar circumstances, look, can it be helpful? Yes. Is it ever going to replace a hands-on touch of a leader with a sense of direction and confidence and imparting that to caucus? Never. And it can really actually serve to distance and increase that isolation for the leader and to really, again, feed the problem within caucus. I think caucus members at this point, they don't want to talk to staff. They've told staff what they think, right? That's not, messages are for fucking Western Union. If you have something to say to your caucus, say it yourself at a moment like this. And the fact that he is not doing that, I think is telling both about the weaknesses in his own internal caucus management approach that have been there all along, but now that they're in a moment of crisis, those reflexes are actively harming him again.
Yeah. Scott, so people are popping up all over the place. As you mentioned, some of them, others. There's letters from caucus. And what are the actual leverage points against Trudeau right now? If you're somebody out there that wants him to leave, what has leverage over that decision?
Very little. I think from a mechanistic standpoint, the only thing that creates pressure is public demonstrations of concern and numbers. So I don't think this is a caucus that has a culture of saying, let's put together an open letter that includes 50 members saying it's time for you to go. They won't go that way. By the way, not even as atypical and ahistorical as this government has been in that respect, very few start there anyway. They start first, they'll go after others. So not only is it a bad idea for staff to be calling MPs, it's a risky thing to do because it's only natural that you're going to see at some point, again, if this vacuum isn't filled, that they'll wheel on staff and a couple of key cabinet ministers. I think you'll start to see calls come from people saying, well, Jesus Christ, there's got to be change. It's like if there's no addressing change, people will invent a form of change short of the prime minister leaving that they feel they can publicly express. So, hi, it's Scott Reid calling from the prime minister's office. I'm just calling to confirm your unqualified support for the boss. Also would like to know that you have no problems with me, right? Great talking to you. Click. Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you, Reid. That is obviously how that's going to undergo. So,
I say caucus always demands a blood sacrifice. To be very careful that you're not the one on the altar there.
Exactly. And again, which is why I think there's more than one kind of risk to not filling this vacuum. And it isn't just that there'll be more brazen calls for Trudeau to leave, but that is obviously one. I also think I really want to dig into spend 1 second on Jordan's point, which is it is an interesting feature of this government that Trudeau may not, for all of the various skills that he does have that make him a uniquely capable leader and have given him such an incredible run, he may not possess the skills when it comes to caucus management that he most severely requires right now. The lack of a personal relationship, the inability to pick the phone up and call a handful of caucus members without being a dramatic and strange and uncomfortable event. That's a disadvantage at this moment. Final thing I would just say is one of the interesting dynamics about these kinds of demands for change too in these situations is that, yes, all leaders think they are best. One of the exceptions, one of the only small asterisks to that is you may find a leader in some circumstance that's willing to concede that if the project is to lead the party as well off as possible in a certain loss, well, then maybe somebody else would be better suited to do it. But they will always turn back and go, but God damn it, if our project is to dig this thing out of the dirt, is to rise from the ashes, and to probably inspire Canadians and win this election, or Americans, then I'm the only fucker standing that can do so. And it is an interesting gap between political people and non-political people, because when you talk to a lot of your friends and neighbors or even journalists, they'll say stuff like, well, surely the Liberals recognize they're going to lose anyway, so they're better off selecting this person or that person in order to save the furniture. But what they fail to realize is, like, prime ministers, leaders, politicians, and political folk, we don't think that way. You cannot get up in the morning if your starting cup of coffee is, I'm fucked and we're going to lose. You just don't.
Welcome to the last 2 weeks of the 2018 campaign. But in any event,
yeah. Well, but in that case, I think, the win saying she'd step down, gave you another 5 seats.
Well, but she's an astonishing person who would do that, and it's pretty rare, the people that would do that. Kory, one of the things that I find that observers frequently make a mistake about when they're talking about this is they think it's an institutional decision. Like they say, what are the Liberals going to do? Why don't the Liberals get rid of Trudeau, right? It isn't like that, is it?
No, it's not like that. It's entirely the individual who's sitting in the top chair's decision. Like triply so, just because of the mechanics of it for Biden. Like it's an absolutely his decision and his decision alone, because of the way delegates are nominated and bound to a candidate by law. So it always comes down to I think the top person deciding that they're going to leave. I think it's complicated by one other set of issues that I think are pretty universal for people who are either a president or a prime minister sitting one, and that is your legacy. The policies that really are central to your political identity, the things that you brought in and pushed through government and instituted. In the case of Trudeau, certainly carbon tax is at the center of that, and I think he knows the second he steps down, any other Liberal leader is going to run away from that policy in one way, shape, or form, and that legacy piece that's so central to his political identity is going to be gone. Well, it's also going to be gone if he loses, and so it's hanging on to very thin or completely false hope that you're going to be able to preserve that political legacy. But I think the longer you stay and the lower your numbers go, the more of the things that you did while you were in office are going to be gone the day you leave. Like, they'll be torn down. And the true test for what your legacy is what remains after you leave. And in the case of Trudeau, I think it's fewer and fewer things like that are going to be there. Like, I would say the pharmacare stuff almost certainly going to be gone. Certainly not expanded further from where it is, but in all likelihood gone. Carbon tax gone for sure. And I think that becomes a different set of motivating factors that keep people in place. So it's not only I'm the only one who can do this job and the only one who can fight this, but I'm also the only person who's going to fight for my political legacy and ensure these things that are important to me are still the law of the land.
I also don't think we can underestimate how important it is sometimes for principals to want to beat the other guy on a personal level, right? And I think that you see that with Biden against Trump. Like, he wants to take the fight to Trump again because of who Trump is and the type of danger he represents to democracy in America. And you see that with Trudeau, who does not think he should be beaten by somebody like Pierre Poilievre, because he really views him as somebody he's not serious. For all the reasons that he's articulated, he doesn't want to be beaten by him, and he thinks he can do that. And I think that motivating factor at a personal level is really significant for them.
But the electorate rarely shares those beliefs. Like, what's very clear in U.S. polling is not everyone thinks that Donald Trump is the big risk existential risk to democracy that the core of the Democratic Party believes him to be.
Yeah, I regrettably totally agree with you.
and likewise, it's like not just likewise, but many-fold greater. Very few Canadians believe that Pierre Poilievre is a threat to democracy at any level whatsoever. So, some of these beliefs that leaders hold in that regard, and I totally agree with you, Jordan. I think that's that's a big part of what's going on in both these cases. They're just not shared by the electorate, and in the case of Poilievre, not shared by reality either.
Right. We have entered glorious July, people. Hot, lazy, fun July. It's the best month. And at the end of this week, one of the best July events begins. Friday is the first day of the Calgary Stampede, or just Stampede as it's called by those who know. Our sponsor, CN, is a longtime friend and supporter of Stampede, as you'd expect. But I want to talk for a minute or so about CN's role in Alberta writ large. The simple fact is that no other company is more important to Alberta's economy and way of life. CN connects Alberta to the world. From Fort McMurray south to Calgary, the province is a vast hive of production and manufacturing, and the railway enables it all. Just about everyone understands by now that the Alberta heartland is Canada's largest producer of hydrocarbons. Natural gas, butane, crude oil, refined diesel and gasolines, and renewable energy products. Alberta fuels huge swaths of North America, and CN literally hauls Alberta energy. Then there's forestry. You might not know it, but more than 60% of Alberta is forested. Lumber, wood pellets, and pulp head to foreign markets from Alberta, all carried by CN trains. And of course, grain. CN and grain are indivisible. The prairies are grain, and CN moves millions of tons a year, has for more than a century. You know, about 3,300 CN railroaders make their homes in Alberta. The railway operates 2,500 miles of Alberta routes. It spent nearly $1 billion locally in Alberta last year and paid $65 million in cash taxes. This all adds up to prosperity for Albertans. CN is deeply proud of its place in Alberta's history and economy. Albertans can count on CN, and it wishes everyone a most excellent stampede. Scott, anything? Wrap up on this?
I don't think so, other than, first of all, it feels seedy, eh? Like it feels, having this discussion, it's always so uncomfortable because you feel like you're picking on the bones, when
I don't know. I feel, you know what? I feel that a little bit way about Trudeau. I feel that a little bit that way about Trudeau because I still do feel some of the gratitude for 2015 and that comeback, and I think he's getting a bit of a bad rap in terms of how unpopular he is right now. Biden, I don't have any of that for. That guy has no business being the president. Right now, he's got no business being the president. Asking people to give him another 4 years is one of the weirdest things any party's ever asked of Americans.
Yeah, actually, I agree with that strongly. We did the CTV coverage of the debate. The last thing I said before the debate began was, my God, just let's not underestimate how huge a risk this is. If his jaw locks and he begins to mumble the Lord's Prayer, this election could be over in June. And then 4 minutes in, we were all WhatsApping each other going, Jesus Christ, he's mumbling the Lord's Prayer. This is beyond belief. This is worse than possibly imaginable. And this junk about a bad night, come on, man. Yeah. It's not a bad night. This is a fundamental condition.
And it's not 81. He's got a condition. I've seen a lot of 81-year-old people that could do way better than that. He's got a condition.
This is the key. That is the key point. People can lose a debate. Like if we're switching to that topic a bit here, you can lose a debate. And, what's normal in a debate is everybody walks away thinking their team won and not a lot changes, very little changes in a debate. What I have never seen and what happened in that debate is where both sides walk away saying, this person is not capable of doing the job today, let alone tomorrow or 4 years from now. And as you say, it's not about the age. Age in many ways is just a number. some people, you can, God forbid, you could have early onset, Alzheimer's or something like that. And you could be 50 years old and be in a state of cognitive decline to the extent that you're incapable of serving in any senior role, let alone the president of the United States of America. And he is so clearly in that space. And so he didn't lose the debate. He lost the conversation of whether he is capable of being president today.
Yep. No, absolutely. Kory, let me stick with you because I know you've done a lot of debate prep. I mean, this is the question everybody's at. We're into this debate section now. This is the question everybody's asking themselves. Is Biden asked for the debate? Biden challenged Trump to the debate. Biden spent a week preparing for this thing at Camp David with Ron Klain and Anita Dunn and the rest of that group. How did they let this happen? Like, honest to God, how did they let this happen?
I think that his decline has been evident to people in just observing him publicly. But it's as is often the case with cognitive decline, it varies, from conversation to conversation, not just day to day. But you can have moments of clarity and normal functioning, followed by periods of absolute train wreck disaster where you're, introducing your spouse to the same person 3 times in a row. Like that is how, at least in my lived experience, how that presents itself. And I think they're also invested in that administration, and I think they felt like, well, we're going to take a chance, and if he can keep it together. Maybe not for the whole debate, but put in a good, 30, 40 minutes at the front end, we'll whistle past this and we'll continue to another day. But it was, clearly a gamble on their part, but it is absolutely impossible, I think, for anyone who observed that performance that there were not signs of that, because there have been so many public signs over the last months. I think it started the moment he got onto stage. Like, how he shuffled out to the podium was someone who is in a very poor physical state, who is maybe 81, but he's not a, Jimmy Pattison at 81 and could be president of the United States. This guy clearly could not. Not everyone ages at the same rate.
Jordan, they'd have been better off to come out 5 minutes before and say he has a cold and he can't do it. Because what it turns out to be is that the reality was worse than what anybody was fearing.
Yes.
If they had just left it to people's imaginations, it would have been better than the reality.
Yeah. I mean, look, this whole thing is incredibly alarming. And I think, many others have said it, but I'll repeat it. It was complete malpractice on the part of his team to demand this first debate without knowing that the president was up for it. I think based on the performance, there's obviously, he was dealing with some cognitive issues, maybe an illness as well. But there were also, I think, issues in the preparation. If you look at how he was performing, even in sections where he was more coherent, it was, he was a performer who had too many facts jammed into his head and was not focused on the overall impact of the performance, the dynamism as compared to his opponent, connection with the audience. None of that was present. And I think what was so damning as well is just the pure contrast, not between him and Trump, but between the Joe Biden that we saw on that stage versus what we saw in the debates in 2020. It is 2 different people. And it was a collision with reality, I think, that is maybe all the more stark because of the way his campaign has isolated him from any type of unpredictable or tough media over the last year. And so really the distance between the speculation about his health, about his cognition, and then actually seeing it was so much worse than what had been spun. And that really, I think, heightened the impact. And I understand the impulse, for the Democrats, this drives so many of them crazy because Trump got on that stage and
lied his ass off, and he was orange,
but also said a myriad of extremely worrying things, including not committing to accepting the results of the election. But all of that was washed away because his craziness was already baked in. Like, that was expected. What was a shock was Biden's poor performance. And so I really think that this should be a moment of crisis for the Democratic campaign. This should be their moment where they say, can we choose somebody on a ticket can we choose a ticket at convention? They need an off-ramp on this. I agree, though. I don't think that they're going to take that off-ramp. I think that every instinct is to circle the wagons. We're already seeing, the top surrogates, obviously Gavin Newsom most strongly among them, out there doing that, and all for their very own individual logical reasons. But the overall impact is going to be just catastrophic for the Democratic campaign and for the U.S. in general.
Yeah. Well, you really got a window, and we could talk about this in Team Trudeau too, of the role of the enablers, the role of the people who are closest to the principal and what they're saying, because Jill Biden put it on full display in that post-debate ridiculous hype session that looked like I don't know, like a mother or a school teacher or someone talking to a young child with some learning challenges or something. He was like hunched over, standing there, slack-jawed and confused, like he didn't know what day it was, let alone where he was or who he was talking to. And his wife saying, "Good job, Joe," like patting him on the head. "You answered all the questions and you used your words." Like, just almost comical, but like in the cringiest form of comedy that you can imagine. This display of telling somebody who has no business being there that they did a good job in using the vocabulary that you would use with a small child. Like, it was just cringeworthy.
That's why every leader needs a Terry O'Leary around them, somebody that the leader believes absolutely has nothing but their self-interest, but their own interest at heart, and somebody who's always going to tell them the truth. Right. And there aren't enough of those people around.
It's can I just say on that, it's thinking about how it got to this point, I think is really alarming and insightful, because in order to fool others, you have to first fool yourself. And it feels to me like that's actually what's been going on now for probably a year or two. And that's a conclusion I came to after the debate the other night, is that his team has been able to rationalize and explain and dismiss and compartmentalize and remind themselves of the teleprompter moment when he was good and ignore the risk of when he's bad. And also, by the way, forget to remember that there is a thing called the turning world and the calendar, because they're also, look how good he was at the State of the Union. Yeah, this is not a non-dynamic environment. He's getting older by the day. So it is not plausible to assume that it isn't going to get worse by Christmas, much less 2.5 years from now. The other two things, but in some ways you can almost understand that, because it isn't just do you have somebody who's honest, it's also do you have somebody who's willing in the most uncomfortable, challenging way to be the asshole, and to demonstrate the courage to be the asshole. And I really condemn his team for two things in particular. First, that they were not willing to pull the ripcord, as you say, David, when they were going through the debate prep. It is inconceivable they could go through debate prep and not conclude that this moment was impossible to proceed with. And second, I really, just like the group of us, and I might only be talking to us, but as hacks and advisors, the absolute venal bullshit of some of the post-debate spin, where they talk about how vigorous he was and focused he was during debate prep, which seems intended to defend themselves, not him, which seems intended.
We saw Jen Psaki and Ron Klain cutting Biden loose on X this weekend, where Jen Psaki was saying, don't blame the prep team. They did a great job. Biden was bad. And Ron Klain says, yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
Can you believe
exactly.
that?
I don't. And I think that is beyond reprehensible. And I am among those who think that Trump does represent an existential threat in a whole variety of ways, including to a bunch of fundamental Canadian interests. And like, I don't care how hard it is, because right now the discussion really and the calculation really is it's too hard to dislodge him. He doesn't want to go, and the mechanics of finding a replacement and executing that are virtually impossible, messy, and would condemn us to a public fight that would make a win in November all the more unlikely. Fuck that. I'm sorry, but this is too important a moment. Well, you got to throw everything at the wall to get him out now, because it is certain to be a referendum on him. Trump could do anything. Now he's equipped with permission to be a thief and a crook. Like, it is just too important to not do whatever's uncomfortable and whatever requires someone to be the biggest asshole imaginable. You've got to stop this.
And there's already some shift in the polls, so Trump's lead is widening. But I'm also worried about Democratic turnout, to be honest, because the polling that I've seen indicates that Trump voters were not surprised by the debate. And it didn't change their minds about Biden at all, because that's what they assumed Biden was. It's Democratic voters, Biden voters, that were stunned by what they saw. And their opinions of Biden are plummeting.
Well, that's
so. What are they going to do?
Talk themselves into it, maybe, before being confronted really in the face with its reality. But look, if this doesn't shock the Democratic establishment out of their fatalism, like, there is this sense that they, maybe not unlike some liberals here in Canada, are just laying down and there's nothing that they can do. But there are people here who can make different decisions for a different outcome, and they have a narrow window in which to do that. And God, I hope they do, because there's no, even the most staunch partisan Democrat, like, nobody's excited to vote for Biden in this. Nobody realistically thinks that 3 or 4 years from now he would be capable or the right person to be the president. And it's not, and I actually have a great respect for a lot of the things Biden has done. I think that he was put in this position on that stage, doing that debate was humiliating for him.
Yeah, but I'll tell you one more thing, though. If he genuinely is deteriorating, which it appears he is,
yeah, I think that's unquestionable.
I found in my life sometimes difficult to convince people who are losing their mental faculties that they are losing their mental faculties. I mean, try to convince your mom that she needs to move into a home. It's not fucking easy to do, right?
Yeah, I think you're hitting the nail on the head there, David. And I think one of the reasons why it's so damning for Biden is almost everyone of who's an adult or our age that hasn't gone through some version of this with a beloved member of their family, like where whether it's a grandparent or a parent or a great grandparent or it's someone a treasured aunt, whoever it is, like somebody who you really love and care about, who is going through some sort of cognitive decline or decline to the point where you have to make a tough choice about going into assisted living or losing their driver's license or any of these things. And it's hard to get consensus within your family in those situations, because you'll have a sibling or someone who's doesn't see the person every day, who will argue that no, they're just having a bad day and you don't know what's going on. And then you'll have, once you get consensus within that sort of family group, then trying to get the person who's actually being afflicted by those symptoms to come to reality and to take additional help or whatever it is. That is another, level of fight that normally has to go on. And almost everyone has gone through some version of this and knows what that's like and what that looks like. This is just being put on full display. And it's with somebody, it's not about whether or not they should drive their car. It's whether or not they should have their finger on the nuclear button.
Right.
Like the consequence of it is so astronomically huge that it can't be ignored. And so I think you're once again right on the money. And where the political risk in all of this is Democratic voters who are going to say, I cannot in good conscience cast a ballot for this individual. And they either vote for somebody else like Kennedy, or they just stay home and say, Trump is terrible, but I cannot look myself in the mirror if I go to a ballot box and put this person in that position. Yeah. Just impossible to do.
Yeah. All right. Let's thank you for that
All
conversation.
right.
There's a lot of psychology,
All right.
but all right.
Yeah,
So let's go to our clipping because it makes me smile.
Let's drink
Nothing,
some Murphy's.
very little does these days, but this clipping makes me smile. It's the scoop of the week. Justin Ling eavesdropping on Stephen Guilbeault for the Toronto Star. And I'm going to read too much of this just because I enjoy it. Stephen Guilbeault has been taking the temperature of the Liberal Party caucus as calls for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's resignation mount. He spent Thursday working the phones with Liberals across the country, trying to take stock of how bad things really are. I know this because Guilbeault did some of this work in public, in the Via Rail Business Lounge, as he sat next to Canada's least recognizable columnist, me. If we're not trying to address it, it will fester, Guilbeault mused into his wireless headphones, loud enough for me to hear without moving a muscle. So this conversation will need to happen whether we want it to or not. Over the course of 3 phone calls, it became clear Guilbeault was feeling around for who might be most likely to call for Trudeau's departure. I've been asked by PMO to make some calls and talk to people and report back, he said on one of those calls. In his calls, Guilbeault was alternately reassuring and speculative. While some Liberal MPs might be rattling their chains, he said on the phone, Trudeau is still the odds-on favorite to lead the Liberals into the next election. It's highly unlikely that it happens, he said, made it clear being Trudeau's resignation. But, Guilbeault added, I wouldn't rule it out. Unlikely as it may be, Guilbeault began gaming out what a post-Trudeau near future could look like. It wouldn't be easy, he said, and would probably plunge the Liberals into a leadership race next June. The 3 finalists, he speculated, are Chrystia Freeland, Anita Anand, and Mark Carney. We have to do something, he said, unless the PM wants to do 150 calls over the summertime, referring to roughly the number of Liberal MPs in the House of Commons. Where to start with this, Scott? Take a run at it. Where would you start with this?
First of all, let's start here. Have we all met Justin Ling?
Yeah.
Yes.
He's hard to miss. He's not a small guy. Okay. And he should be familiar up on site to Guilbeault.
It's not like the gallery's that big anymore either,
no, exactly.
right? Like, it's not like one of 10,000 people. This is one of
Also,
a handful of familiar faces.
You should probably just go ahead and assume that anybody sitting in a business lounge in the Ottawa Via Rail Station, or for that matter, in the Ottawa Airport Lounge, just
we'll
assume.
Be interested. We'll be
That's
interested
right.
in what you have to say.
Those 2 places, not neutral spaces, friends.
Well, I like to say, from this podcast, I'm famous in Japan, and by Japan I mean the Air Canada Lounge at the Ottawa Airport.
I do. It is one general comment I will make, and obviously this is, startlingly indiscreet and unwise of Guilbeault. It is also exactly the kind of thing that happens to you in exactly these kinds of moments. Like it literally is this kind of stuff that happens, and God knows I've been in the middle of it, and it is the definition of you start to make your own bad luck. Like it's just unbelievable when things start to move. They move fast, and inexplicable fuck ups occur. Look, as fuck ups go, this is not deadly. It's just depressing. I think 2 quick takeaways though that I think are intriguing, like little nuggets of it that I find interesting. One is that it's Guilbeault. So Guilbeault's been tasked to make these calls. Again, it goes back to Guilbeault is being used as an agent of the PMO, the PM's operation, that sort of stuff. Okay, so who are we going to get? Because when you're in this situation, you will sit back and go, all right, we can't call people because of the reason Jordan said, which is that they might say, fuck off, I want you to die. I'm going to nail you to the nearest piece of wood I can find. Okay, so who else do we have to call? All right, so they go to Guilbeault. But surely, when you're confronted with an overwhelming desire for change, one of the things you have to contemplate is whether or not you're going to, no matter how severe and uncomfortable it is, abandon the fucking consumer carbon tax. Well, if Guilbeault is one of your horsemen, when you're this tight in the battle, that is alarming, because that means that's something that you'd be unwilling, like the small council won't conclude that we need to abandon the carbon tax. Second thing, if we don't deal with this By the way, it's interesting that he does nevertheless start to contemplate in public, obviously. But what if he does leave? I think, here's the 3 contenders and whatever. And man, that's not the way you fortify the castle, okay? You don't start saying, but listen, if Rhaenyra wins, okay, here's what we're going to do. But also, he says, the alternative to dealing with this and settling this thing in the near term is that, the PM's going to have to make 150 calls this summer. Hey, guys, I go back to my point about a vacuum. This summer, 150 calls? You think that's oh, man, now that's a shitty scenario. Tough for him. I'm sure it's being slightly taken out of context. But 150 calls over the summer? Guys, this locomotive is steaming down the fucking track all summer. You got to move.
Yeah. Well, I'll relate a fun story of a similar situation. I think back in the mid-'90s, was sitting with Jenny Byrne and some other staff at the now defunct Mayflower bar on Queen Street, and
rest in peace.
And speculating rather loudly, and after a few beers, that the first thing we should do if the Reform Party becomes government is to bomb the Toronto Star headquarters and drop napalm on the rubble. Which was, obviously a joke, but I then had somebody come and introduce themselves.
Not so obvious.
Tim Harper, who said, "Hi, I'd like to introduce myself. New in town, Tim Harper, new national affairs columnist for the Toronto Star. So glad you're going to be visiting our office." And I had to go back and tell poor Jim Armour that, oops, your staff member here really fucked up. But anyway, it's just, I love the story so much because it is so indiscreet and so amateurish. Maybe that's excusable for me back then because there's, 20-something-year-old punk. But this is a senior member of cabinet who should know better than to be having those kinds of conversations in that venue. Agree with everything that Scott said in terms of if this is your Praetorian Guard of cabinet, man, oh man, that tells you a lot about this government and what's important to it, and how impossible to change direction it's going to be if that's the case. Carbon tax is the millstone around the neck of this government right now. And if Guilbeault is your pitch man to cabinet and caucus, you're clearly signaling you're not gonna alter course at all.
The other thing about Guilbeault, Jordan, is he's not seen as political. Like if I was a caucus member, I might entertain a serious call from Dominic LeBlanc about what the politics of this are and what a plan to get out of this might be. But if I'm an MP, I almost certainly think I know more about politics than Guilbeault does.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I don't think Guilbeault is seen by anyone as having the keys to a resuscitation strategy for this government. I mean, look, I was as struck by the messenger as I was by the message. I think like Scott and Kory, this is not, if you are picking somebody, those outreach calls are not just for temperature taking. Of course, they are also persuasion. And I mean, maybe that goes without saying, but let's say it, because I think that it's also striking that Guilbeault would be asked to do those calls when he is maybe not likely to win prom king within caucus for his handling of the hottest file that the government has had on its desk over the last couple of years. And also, for his, he's not connected with a sense of change or of new direction. He is, in fact, I think, a big part of some of the challenges that this government has faced. So I thought it was a very interesting and telling choice of messenger. And then the message, right? So the fact that even Guilbeault, who has, I think, for his own purposes, every reason to be very loyal to the prime minister and every reason to be privately as well as publicly defending him. But if even he is indulging in a on the one hand, on the other hand speculation, that's not great, right? But the other thing I'll say about that, and I think this is maybe a hunk of salt to take with you as you read any of the inevitable internal leaks and discussions about what Liberal caucus members are saying to each other, is that there is always a lot more brave and courageous and bold internal talk around leadership change, then there will be public talk. And then there will be talk directly to the principal and to the leader. And so I think that you have to weigh it a little bit, right? Because caucus likes to have those conversations with each other, and they will be very strong in those conversations with each other, but it's often a bit of a paper tiger because there's very few of them who will actually have that face-to-face with their principal or their leader, and even fewer who are going to do that publicly. So I think these are also unreliable gauges of what's going to happen internally. And that's just another thing to bear in mind as you're hearing about all of these indiscreet conversations.
Last question for the whole group. Not having a caucus meeting in July, smart or dumb?
Dumb.
Yeah, dumb.
I presume they are worried about gathering everybody together where they can all plot together.
I think you just, sorry, Scott, you should probably weigh in.
All I was going to say is you can't have a caucus meeting until you have a program that you can place in front of caucus that allows you to take control of the situation. A caucus meeting without a program just means that you are surrendering your situation to the loudest, angriest person in the room, or the fear that loudness and anger will catch fire and spread. So you have to come up with a plan, but which returns me to my fundamental thesis, which is you cannot permit this vacuum to continue unfilled. You have to fill it. You've got to say, here's our response to the demand for change. And it's got to be substantial. It's got to be big. And frankly, it kind of has to hurt, because if people don't see that it comes at a cost, that it causes you pain, that it's uncomfortable, they won't believe that it matters. And if it doesn't matter, then it's not to be taken seriously.
But PMO should have that plan, Scott, because you wouldn't have been woken up by the by-election last week, because my opinion about the Liberal Party's position would be absolutely no different had we won that by-election by 2 percentage points. It doesn't matter. That's not the point. Right? It was just an illustration along the way of what the situation the party's in is. So it's not like they would be scrambling after the by-election to say, oh, I guess we need a new re-election strategy. Should have been on that.
Yeah, but all these resets that they've gone through, and there've been several now, they've been so minor and so inconsequential in terms of the things that they need to do that I guess they have to decide whether this is a serious enough situation to actually do something. Thing one would be for Trudeau to decide he's going to leave. We don't think that's going to happen at this point, but that's obviously one. But one that, if we go back a year ago to last summer, when they did their cabinet shuffle, would be to change finance ministers. Clearly, the economic narrative of this government is at the center of its current political problems, and I think we can all agree that that Freeland's communication chops are not up to the task, or that they wouldn't be in the predicament they're in right now. They need to have somebody stronger in that role. I've noticed, the stories speculating about, conversations with Carney about coming in, et cetera, et cetera. Well, talking about that and talking about the conversations isn't what needs to happen. If that's the path you're going down, you need to do it. And
I think PMO is just leaking that shit to discredit him, to be honest.
That could be, but clearly there needs, something needs to change.
They want it to be known that they've asked him and that he said no.
Right. Yeah, well, I think that's probably true. But, something has to change. But that said, in terms of the caucus meeting, you're better to take these things on head on and to show some fearlessness in your ability to meet with your own caucus. If you can't meet with your own caucus to have a political conversation about the future of the government, you have really narrowed your appeal to 11.
This is the point. They're going to talk together or they're going to talk apart. But if you're scared to meet with your own caucus, you have a big problem meeting with voters.
Leadership starts from the center, and the next concentric circle after PMO would be cabinet and caucus. You really gotta get that force united. And it's very clearly on public display that unity does not exist to the level that you need it to if you want to prosecute an election campaign effectively.
Okay. Yep. All right, let's wrap it up. Hey, yous, Gordon Pinsent, where are you, my man?
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
All right, who's got a Hey You?
I got one.
Do it.
So, hey, you this week going out to former BC Premier John Horgan. I think maybe most folks saw the news that he's taken a step back from his new role as Canada's ambassador in Germany to deal with a third bout of cancer. So, just a hey, you, sending lots of good wishes for good health and a quick recovery.
Here.
Absolutely. Here. Second that, wholeheartedly. Scott, what do you got?
On a more positive note about the government, I would like to say, hey, you. I'd send my hey, you out to Seamus O'Regan. This WestJet labor strife was significant. It's, really, destabilizing to a ton of travelers and people. And I didn't just like that O'Regan jumped into it and said, listen, you're going to binding arbitration. That's the way. And since you guys can't come together and deal with it, I'd like the tone of his public communication about it, because he did the thing that this government doesn't do on things large and small very often, which is that he met people with where they're at. He literally sounded like a pissed off traveler when he talked about it and just said, people have had enough of this fucking bullshit. And we expect these guys, and we know they're going to have arguments, but they've got to get settled, and they can't make everybody else a victim of it. And it must have caught on, because both the CEO and even the union leader in their comments afterward made a point of rushing to the microphone and saying, we apologize to the travelers for all the dislocation this caused them. So hats off to Seamus O'Regan. And, he's been reliably capable in that labor portfolio. Hard to shine when there's so many clouds in the sky, but doing a good job.
He's impressed everywhere they've put him.
Yep.
Right.
Very solid.
Yep. Corey?
Yeah, I'm going to do mine to chiefs of police out there, and maybe with like a little echo to some of the mayors and leaders. I thought the having 30 Palestinian protesters or pro-Palestine protesters disrupt the Pride Parade in Toronto, to which hundreds of thousands of people plan trips around and go to participate in one way, shape, or form. To have a group of people disrupt an event of that magnitude and such a small number of them.
There was some irony to it, I must say.
Look, if you were gay in Gaza, you'd be thrown off the last standing building in town. There's that too. But it's beyond the Israel-Palestine conflict. It's we saw versions of this with the convoy here in Ottawa during the pandemic, and countless other situations. The police need to start doing their fucking job. And that means that sometimes you have to arrest people. And this sort of hands off, let everybody do whatever they want, whenever they want, wherever they want, approach to policing doesn't work. And I don't like the world where, politicians are responsible for setting policing policy or making policing decisions. I don't think that's a good part of the world to be living in either. But we either have to go to a world where politicians, can intervene and make some decisions around this, or the police have to stand up and do their fucking job. But I thought it was an embarrassment for the city of Toronto. I thought it was an embarrassment for the rule of law to have a little group of people disrupt an event of that magnitude. Just absolute fucking stupidity. So shame on those guys. Hey, you, do your fucking job.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. My hey you goes out to Mr. Justice John Roberts of the U.S. Supreme Court, which is you're presiding over a catastrophe. There is nothing more fundamental to a democracy than belief in the system of justice and belief in the fairness of the court system and the nonpartisanship and above the fray nature of the Supreme Court is fundamental. That is being eroded rapidly and is perhaps the most dangerous thing going on in the United States. And with Trump, that's difficult to say. But I think the Supreme Court might actually be the most dangerous thing that's going on, and the sense that it is now a tool of partisanship for either party cannot stand. And there has to be some fundamental reform of that court that changes the way people are perceiving of it right now. Anyway, that's my hey you. Thank you three for being with me here today. So much fun. I want to thank all you accursed who watched or listened. And I want to thank our presenting sponsor, Telus, and our sponsor, CN Rail. All of you who watched or listened, come back next week for more of the Curse of Politics. Probably Monday next week, be my guess. See you then.